The county courthouse always smelled faintly of polish and nerves. Marble floors gleamed under fluorescent lights, and hushed voices echoed down long hallways lined with wooden benches. But when I walked into the courtroom for Karen White's trial, all I could hear was the echo of my own heartbeat. She sat at the defense table, no longer in pastel pink, but in a faded orange jumpsuit. Her once perfect bob was limp, pulled back into a sad little ponytail. Her skin looked sallow, her makeup gone. Without her armor of power and appearance, she looked small. Her lawyer shuffled papers beside her, his suit wrinkled, his eyes darting nervously. Across the aisle, D.A. Patel sat poised, immaculate in his tailored suit, every move deliberate. He was the kind of man who wasted nothing. Not words, not gestures. The trial began with jury selection, then opening statements. Karen's defense tried to paint her as a misunderstood neighbor, overzealous but harmless. They hinted that I was a hysterical son with a grudge, exaggerating a neighborly dispute. But Patel didn't raise his voice. He didn't bluster. He simply stood, hands clasped behind his back, and said in a calm, steady tone, "This case is not about a garden hose. It is not about a welcome mat. It is about a woman who wrapped herself in the petty authority of an HOA handbook and believed it gave her the right to decide who lives and who dies." The jury leaned in. The evidence began. First, the ICU footage. Silent, grainy, undeniable. The jurors watched Karen in her pink sweater reach for the ventilator tube. Some gasped. One woman shook her head slowly, lips pressed tight. Next came the ventilator logs. An engineer from the company testified, pointing at a chart projected. On a large screen, the green line dipped sharply. Airflow interrupted. Pressure alarm triggered. Timestamp, 3:59 p.m. The same moment Karen's hand gripped that tube. Numbers didn't lie. Machines didn't lie. Then came the texts. Patel walked the jury through each one, reading them aloud, his voice steady, clinical. He's the reason for the whole problem. If the problem goes away, everyone is better off. Just a little tug on the tube. It will look like an accident. The words hung in the air like poison. The jurors' faces hardened. What had once been a community squabble had become something darker, monstrous. After the evidence came the people. Nurse Maya took the stand, trembling, voice cracking as she admitted her fear. She described the harassment, the fines, the threats. She read her own messages aloud, tears sliding down her face. The jury didn't see her as a conspirator. They saw her as a victim. Young, terrified, manipulated. Then it was my turn. I swore in, sat in the witness box, and looked into the eyes of 12 strangers holding my father's life in their hands. I told them about the sounds of the ICU, the sleepless nights, the bitter coffee, the exhaustion that settled into my bones. And then I told them about walking into that room, seeing her hand on the tube, and knowing, without a shred of doubt, that she was about to kill my father. Karen's lawyer tried to needle me on cross-examination. Your father and Ms. White had disagreements about HOA policies, isn't that right? About a new community gate? Yes, I said evenly. They disagreed, but my father didn't believe disagreement was a death penalty offense. One juror actually nodded. The defense tried to argue the texts were jokes, that the footage was open to interpretation, that Karen had been misunderstood. But the jury's blank stares told the story. They weren't buying it. Finally, closing arguments. Karen's lawyer was loud, desperate. Trying to distract with talk of community disputes and exaggerated grudges, Patel, by contrast, walked slowly in front of the jury, his voice low, steady, but cutting like a blade. She did not see a sick man in that bed. She saw a problem, and she decided to end it. Silence followed his words, heavy and absolute. The jury deliberated less than 2 hours. When they filed back in, their faces were grim. I held my breath, my Aunt Tasha's hand gripping mine tight enough to leave marks. The foreman, a middle-aged man in a polo shirt, stood and handed the verdict form to the bailiff. He didn't look at Karen. The clerk read aloud. On the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, guilty. Relief washed over me so hard it nearly buckled my knees. The clerk continued. Tampering with a medical device? Guilty. Forgery? Guilty. Conspiracy? Guilty. Extortion? Guilty. Every word was another weight lifted, another stone stacked on the wall that would keep her away forever. When the jury was dismissed, Karen slumped in her chair. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow. The queen of the cul-de-sac had finally fallen. But the trial wasn't the end. Sentencing was next, and Judge Romero had the final word. Everyone tells you hospitals are quiet places, but it's not true. Not when you're in the ICU. That quiet is heavy. It hums. It creeps under your skin. The soft beeps of the heart monitor, the hiss and click of an IV drip, the steady push of the ventilator forcing air into weak lungs. It becomes the soundtrack of your life when you've been living in that room for 2 weeks straight. I remember sitting there, slumped in a stiff vinyl chair that felt like it had been designed to punish anyone who dared to stay too long. My body was running on vending machine coffee that tasted like burnt plastic, and maybe 3 hours of broken sleep at a time. But I couldn't leave. My dad was in that bed, the strongest man I'd ever known. And he was helpless. The doctors said pneumonia, severe. It had gone septic. They said he was fighting, and I knew he was, because my dad was stubborn. He was my grandpa's son, and stubbornness was practically a family heirloom. I just had to be there to make sure nothing got in the way of that fight. It was 3:55 in the afternoon when I finally caved and left the room. Just 7 minutes. That was all I allowed myself, a record-breaking trip to the cafeteria for another bitter cup of coffee. I hurried back, clutching the paper cup like it mattered, and when I opened the door, something felt wrong. The air was colder, the light harsher, and then I saw her, Karen White, president of our HOA. She was standing at my father's bedside, blonde hair in that perfect severe bob, pastel pink knit top that looked like it belonged in a Sunday brunch catalog. She wore a smile that was all teeth and no warmth, and around her neck dangled a laminated badge on a cheap chain. Too clean, too new, wrong. For a moment, my exhausted brain tried to make sense of it. We weren't friends. We weren't even acquaintances outside of HOA meetings. My dad had been the one organizing neighbors to question her ridiculous special assessment, the thousands she wanted to waste on a new community gate. He thought she was a bully. I thought she was a tyrant with a tape measure. But what was she doing here? Then I saw her hand move, slow, deliberate, past the IV lines, past the heart monitor leads. Her fingers, manicured and painted a pale pink, wrapped around the thick ventilator tube at my father's throat. My coffee slipped. It hit the floor with a dull thud, lukewarm liquid spilling across the tiles. The sound barely registered because, in that instant, everything else roared in my ears. She was touching it, the very tube keeping my father alive. Time stretched, my whole world tilted, narrowing to that single image, her hand clenching, her knuckles white. My father's fragile chest still rising and falling beneath the machine's rhythm. And then instinct took over. I didn't think, I just moved. My legs lunged before my mind caught up. My hand slammed down on the big red button on the wall, the code gray alarm. The world erupted. A shrieking siren blared, stabbing through my skull. A strobe light flashed red across the sterile room. The heavy ICU door slammed shut behind me, the magnetic lock sealing us in. It was just me, my unconscious father, and Karen White. She whipped around, her mask slipping. The fake smile dissolved into a snarl, her voice cracked, like a whip, shrill and cutting. "What do you think you're doing?" I didn't answer. I just stepped in front of the bed, arms out, body rigid. My dad's breath was my line in the sand, and I wasn't letting her cross it. She hissed like some cornered thing and grabbed the IV pole, yanking it like a weapon. I shoved it away, kicked the wheel brake, and heard the heart monitor spike, then steady. My pulse thundered louder than the alarms. "Don't touch him," I said. My voice came out flat, cold. Her eyes narrowed. She tried to sidestep, but I moved with her, hands gripping the rail of my father's bed. Behind me, I heard pounding on the door. Shouts. Keys fumbling in the lock. Help was seconds away, but in those seconds it was only me. She leaned closer. Her smile reappeared, small and mean. "Rules are rules," she whispered. I shook my head. "Not here, not today." The lock buzzed, disengaging. The door swung open with a crash, and suddenly the room flooded with people, nurses, security, a police officer. Relief washed over me, sharp and fierce, but I didn't move. Not until someone bigger, stronger, and officially in uniform stepped between her and my father's bed. And in that frozen moment before they grabbed her, before the shouting and the cuffs and the chaos, I realized something that chilled me to the bone. I hadn't just caught Karen trespassing. I hadn't just caught her bending rules or sneaking where she didn't belong. I had just stopped her from killing my father. Everyone froze when the door slammed open. For a split second, the siren still screamed. The strobe light still flashed red across the room, and yet it felt like time itself had stopped. Nurse Lena was the first inside. Her face, usually calm, collected, reassuring, had hardened into something sharper, steelier. Her eyes scanned everything in a single sweep. The monitors, my father's pale body, my stance in front of the bed, and then Karen White, her manicured hand still hovering too close to the ventilator tube. Behind Lena came a uniformed officer, Jordan, a young cop built like a linebacker, but moving with the precision of a man trained not to waste energy. His jaw was set, his eyes already cataloging the scene, and when they landed on me, a human barricade between my father and that woman in pink, his expression hardened further. Voices crowded the doorway. More nurses, security, even family. Members drawn by the alarm. The ICU, normally sacred and quiet, was suddenly chaos. "She tried to touch his ventilator." My voice cracked, raw with adrenaline. I pointed straight at Karen, hand trembling. "She doesn't belong here. Get her out." Karen's head snapped toward the uniforms, and just like that, she transformed. Her rage, her snarl, gone. In its place, a mask of innocence, wide eyes shimmering with crocodile tears. "This is a misunderstanding," she cried, her voice pitching higher, almost theatrical. "I'm a family friend. I came to pray for him, that's all." She flashed, the laminated badge like it meant something. Her voice dripped with the kind of false sincerity she used to dominate HOA meetings, the tone that bullied neighbors into silence. But it didn't work here. Not with Lena. "This unit is restricted," Lena cut in, her tone flat, cold as the sterile air around us. "And you are not on the visitor list." The cop didn't waste a breath. He stepped forward, heavy boots on linoleum. "Ma'am, you need to come with me." Karen puffed up, shoulders squared, chest swelling with self-importance. That pastel, pink top seemed to inflate with her arrogance. "You can't do this. I am the president of our homeowners association. I have rights." The officer didn't even blink. His silence was louder than her shouting, and then from the doorway, another voice joined the fray. Familiar. Steady. It was my Aunt Tasha, my dad's sister. She had been on her way to bring me a book, but now she stood frozen in the doorway, taking in the scene. The cops, the alarms, Karen White in her ridiculous pink sweater, and in that perfect deadpan way only my aunt could manage, she said, "Karen, honey, pool rules don't work in an ICU." It broke the tension for just a second. One of the officers, Ruiz, stocky, sharp-eyed, let out a short laugh, shaking his head. But the moment passed quickly. Jordan stepped forward again, his voice firm. "Ma'am, let's go." That's when Karen made her biggest mistake. She tried to push past him. It happened fast. His hand snapped out, clamping around her arm with the precision of training. A scrub tech in blue caught her other side, bracing her in the doorway. It wasn't violent, just immovable. Karen shrieked like she'd been burned. "Get your hands off me! Assault! This is assault!" And that's when the dam inside me broke. All the exhaustion, the weeks of sleepless nights, the fear of losing. My father, it all boiled over. My voice erupted in a roar that seemed to shake the room. "She is not family." The words cut through everything. The alarms, the shouts, even Karen's shrill protest. The entire room froze, eyes turned to me, nurses clutching monitors, security guards gripping radios, everyone waiting for what came next. And then, the metallic snap of handcuffs closing. Click, click. Officer Jordan twisted Karen's wrists behind her back, his face a mask of disgust. Ruiz stepped in beside him, holding up the fake badge she'd used to sneak inside. The flimsy chain swung pathetically under the red strobe light. Karen twisted, trying to lock eyes with me. Her voice dropped to a hiss. "You'll pay for this!" Ruiz blocked her line of sight. "Ma'am, look forward!" His voice was stone. Jordan's words followed, deliberate, for everyone to hear. "You are under arrest for trespass and interference in a medical unit." Karen thrashed once more, her heels squealing against the linoleum. A scrub tech rubbed his arm and muttered under his breath, "Should have worn bite gloves." Even in the chaos, someone in housekeeping wheeled past, unplugged a floor buffer and said, "Wrong plug again," then kept moving. It was surreal. But then it ended. The alarm silenced. The red strobe clicked off. The room was bathed again in the ordinary sterile light, and for the first time in what felt like hours, the ICU breathed. Nurse Lena moved quickly to my dad's side, checking connections, smoothing lines, her hands steady. "He's stable," she said. "You hit that button just in time." The fight drained out of me all at once. My legs trembled, adrenaline bleeding into exhaustion. I sagged against the wall. Aunt Tasha's hand found my arm, grounding me. "You did good, kid," she whispered. I could only nod. My throat was too tight to answer, and in the hall, past the crowd of stunned faces, Karen White was marched away. Her pink sweater looked smaller now. Her title, her threats, her arrogance, meaningless against the sharp metallic weight of handcuffs. I exhaled a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, and deep inside, I knew this wasn't the end. Because monsters like her don't vanish when the sirens fade. They come back. And I had just declared war. My hands were still shaking when the officers pulled me into a side office. The adrenaline had drained out of me, leaving nothing but a heavy exhaustion and a gnawing question. What now? The air inside that little room was stale, the kind of recycled air that clung to your tongue. A man in a gray suit introduced himself as the hospital's risk manager. Officer Ruiz sat across from me, face like granite, while Officer Jordan leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Nurse Lena slipped in too, her calm presence grounding me. The risk manager wasted no time. He tapped a keyboard, and a set of images popped up on a monitor. "All right," he said, voice clipped, businesslike. "Let's walk through the timeline." The first image, Karen White at the front desk, 3:47 p.m. She was smiling, holding up a laminated badge. He zoomed in. The font was off, the hospital logo slightly pixelated, and the bold word across the bottom, clergy. My stomach churned. She had faked her way into the ICU by pretending to be a minister. "She's not clergy," I said flatly. "She's the devil in a pink sweater." Jordan grunted, and Ruiz's jaw tightened. The risk manager kept going. The temp nurse on duty, a young woman named Maya, had scanned the badge. The barcode registered valid because it was tied to an old guest pass that hadn't been deactivated. Security lapse, strike one. Then he pulled up the CCTV footage. There she was. Karen walking down the pristine hospital corridor, heels clicking, her face set with purpose. Behind her, young Maya kept glancing over her shoulder, visibly nervous. Next screen, the camera outside my dad's room. At 3:51, I walked out, coffee cup in hand. At 3:52, Maya swiped her own badge and let Karen in. Then she practically ran away. It wasn't just a mistake. She'd known exactly what she was doing. The risk manager clicked again. Another screen appeared. Numbers, graphs, jagged lines. "This," he said, pointing with his pen, "is the ventilator log." The green line was steady, rhythmic. My father's breaths, machine-driven, perfectly measured. Then, a sudden, violent dip. A red spike, 59 p.m. Obstruction alarm. The machine had compensated, forcing more air through, but for 3 long seconds his airflow had been compromised. My chest tightened. I could see her hand again in my mind, those pale pink nails on the blue tube. "And this," the risk manager said, "is when the code gray was triggered." He tapped the timestamp. 3:59:12. The numbers lined up like puzzle pieces. It wasn't just my word anymore. It wasn't just chaos and memory. It was data. Cold, hard, irrefutable. Ruiz sealed the footage, the logs, the badge, evidence bags, chain of custody. His tone was clipped when he looked at me. "This isn't trespass anymore. This is tampering with a life support system. It's felony territory. I should have felt relief." Instead, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. One message. Drop. It or Dad stops breathing for real. I felt my blood turn to ice. I turned the screen so everyone could see. The room froze. The door opened and a woman walked in, badge on her belt, eyes sharp as knives. Detective Mallory. She took the phone from me like it was a live weapon. "Good," she said, calm, steady. "Now we add threats to the file." She fired off a text, called in digital forensics. "We'll pull the SIM, trace the tower hits, don't reply," she instructed. I hadn't even thought of replying. My mind was stuck on those words, carved into my brain like stone. Dad stops, breathing for real. That's when Mallory shifted focus. She pulled up a chair in another sterile room, this time across from Maya, the temp nurse. She didn't bark questions, didn't slam the table. Instead, she sat beside her, soft voice cutting through the girl's sobs. "We know you're scared," she said. "We just need the truth." Maya's first story was weak, rehearsed. She said she was busy, short-staffed. Karen had a badge. She just wanted to help. Her voice shook, watery and thin, but Mallory didn't buy it. She leaned closer, voice low, steady. "You're top of your class, Maya. You don't miss details." That badge said clergy. She was wearing a pink sweater, not a collar. You saw that. You knew. "So tell me, what scared you enough to let her in?" Silence. A silence that felt endless. And then Maya broke. She sobbed, shaking, pulling her phone out of her bag with trembling hands. She slid it across the table. "She's been threatening me," she choked. "For weeks." Jordan and I leaned in as Mallory opened the messages. The first ones were almost laughable. HOA fines. Wind chimes not approved. $100 fine. Oil stains in the parking spot. $250. Then, darker. Karen had discovered Maya's temp nursing contract, her weak spot. A letter to your agency could ruin your career. The threats escalated. More fines, more pressure. Maya had been drowning, and then the texts turned sinister. I see your patient list, Nate Carter's father. My blood ran cold. He's costing everyone money. He's the problem. If the problem goes away, everyone's better off. And the last one, sent just minutes before Karen walked into that ICU room, just a little tug on the tube. It'll look like an accident. No one will know. All your fines will disappear. The words hung in the air, heavy as lead. Maya sobbed harder, face in her hands. I didn't feel anger toward her anymore, just fury, cold, pure, aimed at Karen White. Detective Mallory looked up from the phone, her expression now steel. She locked eyes with me. Her voice was absolute. This isn't just trespassing and assault anymore. This is conspiracy and attempted murder. The sound of the gavel still rang in my ears when I learned the unthinkable. Karen White had made bail. For a moment, I couldn't process it. How could someone walk free after trying to pull the ventilator from a dying man's throat? But money talks. Her husband had posted a bond so high it could have bought a lake house and a new SUV. And just like that, she was back on the streets. Her lawyer, polished and expensive, wasted no time spinning the story to the press. According to him, she wasn't a criminal. She was a concerned neighbor, unfairly maligned by a grieving, unstable son. That son was me. I read the headlines, saw my name twisted in comment sections. And yet, none of it mattered compared to one truth. My father was still lying in that bed, still fighting for every breath. So I fought back the only way I knew how. I sat down with a lawyer my Aunt Tasha recommended, a woman with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue. Within hours, we filed for an emergency protective order. The evidence was overwhelming. Police reports, ventilator logs, text messages. The judge granted it on the spot, 100 yards. No contact, no exceptions. It felt like a shield, a thin piece of paper, but a shield all the same. For the first time in weeks, I let myself believe it might be enough, that maybe Karen White, for all her arrogance, wouldn't dare test the authority of a court. I was wrong. 2 days later, I stood in the hospital lobby, coffee in hand. Morning sun poured through the glass windows, warming the sterile floor tiles. For a moment, I felt almost normal. Doctors passed with clipboards, volunteers wheeled carts, kids held balloons for grandparents. And then the automatic doors slid open. My stomach dropped. She was there. Karen White, dressed in another pink top, this one softer, rose-colored but no less defiant. Her hair was perfect, her makeup flawless, her expression smug. She stepped into the lobby as if she owned it, stopping just past the security desk. She didn't have to go further. She knew the line. Her eyes found mine across the lobby, and that smirk curved her lips. She wasn't here to pray. She wasn't here to apologize. She was here to prove the paper meant nothing, to prove that nothing, not the law, not the police, not even a court order, could keep her away. My chest tightened, rage clawing at my ribs. Every instinct screamed to march across the lobby and drag her out myself, to yell, to fight, to make her feel the fear she had put in me. But her lawyer's voice echoed in my head. Unstable son. No, I wasn't going to give her the spectacle she wanted, so I turned my back slightly, pulled out my phone, and dialed 911. My voice was calm, steady. Yes, I'd like to report a violation of a restraining order. The subject's name is Karen White. Location is the main lobby of St. Michael's Hospital. Case number is... I read it out, clear and precise. I could feel her eyes burning into me from across the room. She'd expected a fight, a shouting match, something she could twist. She hadn't expected calm, bureaucratic precision. Less than 2 minutes later, Officer Jordan strode into the lobby. He didn't even need to look for her. His eyes found me on the phone, then scanned the entrance. His gaze landed on Karen, and his face hardened into something I can only describe as disgust. "Ma'am," he said, his voice flat, tired. "You are under arrest, again." The entire lobby went still. A volunteer froze mid-step, pushing a snack cart. A child dropped a teddy bear, the thud echoing louder than it should have. Karen's smirk faltered. "This is harassment," she sputtered. "I was just dropping something off." Jordan didn't even blink. "You are in violation of a court order. Put your hands behind your back." For 3 beats, she didn't move. She tried to hold his gaze, tried to win with her eyes. The gift shop clerk froze mid-scan, holding a balloon that read, "Get well soon." "Hands," Jordan repeated, his tone dropping lower. That was enough. Karen finally turned, muttering something absurd. "I was returning a casserole," the clerk, behind the counter, raised an eyebrow. "Ma'am, this is a hospital, not a potluck," someone snorted. The tension cracked. Jordan cuffed her smoothly, reading the order loud enough for everyone to hear. 100 yards, no contact, no entry, violation. You are remanded." He didn't take his eyes off her as he nodded once at me. "Stay on the line with dispatch." "Yes, officer," I said, my voice steady. "I am safe. I'll wait for the report number." Karen looked small then. Not a queen, not a tyrant. Just a woman in a bad suit, powerless, as the weight of her own arrogance dragged her down. The next morning, we were in court for an emergency bail hearing. Karen sat at the defense table in a wrinkled pantsuit, her expensive lawyer whispering frantically at her side. Across the aisle, I sat with the prosecutor, a sharp, impeccably dressed man named D.A. Patel. He laid it out with surgical precision. "Your Honor," he said, his voice ringing with authority. The defendant was given a clear, unambiguous order by this court. Less than 24 hours later, she chose to willfully and arrogantly disregard it. She is not just a danger to the victim and his family. She demonstrates contempt for the law itself. She is testing the system to see how much she can get away with. Judge Romero, stern, older, eyes like steel, looked down at Karen. For the first time, I saw it. A flicker of fear in Karen's eyes. The judge raised her gavel. Her voice was low. Final. Bail is revoked. You will be remanded into custody until trial. The crack of the gavel echoed through the courtroom. It was the sound of a door slamming shut, and this time it felt permanent. The knock on my door came just after dusk. I'd only just gotten home, still bone-tired from another long day at the hospital, when I opened it to find Mrs. Gable standing on my porch. She was small, frail, a retired librarian who had lived on our block for 40 years. But that night she clutched a worn manila folder to her chest like it was the last lifeboat on a sinking ship. Her voice shook, but her eyes didn't. "Nate," she said softly. "I heard what happened at the hospital. I'm so sorry about your father. I think this might be related." She held out the folder. Inside, I found letter after letter on official HOA letterhead, all signed by Karen White. All absurd. A $500 fine for an improperly stored garden hose. A $200 fine for a non-conforming welcome mat. A threat of legal action because her late husband's wind chime produced unauthorized decibel levels. It was insanity. Extortion disguised as neighborhood rules. My throat tightened. "My dad was helping you with this, wasn't he?" Mrs. Gable nodded, eyes brimming. He was the only one brave enough to stand up to her. He was going to speak for us all at the next meeting. Before I could reply, footsteps crunched on the sidewalk. Mr. Henderson, from across the street, walked up with his own folder. A few minutes later, the Rosarios from 2 doors down showed up, arms full of paperwork. And just like that, my quiet living room turned into a war room. Within an hour, my coffee table was buried under stacks of manila folders, each one a testament to Karen's reign of petty terror. The stories were all the same. She targeted the elderly, the vulnerable, the families least able to fight back. Holiday decorations left up 2 days too long. A basketball hoop leaning against the garage instead of stored inside. Grass that was a 1/4 inch too high. Every violation was another fine, another threat, another dollar into Karen's pocket. And the common thread through every folder was my dad. He had been listening, gathering, organizing, preparing to challenge her abuse with evidence. He hadn't just been a victim of her vendetta. He had been her obstacle, the one man who wouldn't bend, and that's why she had tried to silence him. My Aunt Tasha arrived mid-chaos, carrying a box of donuts and a pot of coffee. She set them down, surveyed the mountain of paper, and shook her head with that dry, cutting humor only she could manage. "This isn't a homeowners association," she said flatly. "It's a protection racket with better landscaping." The room erupted in nervous laughter. But for me, the laughter only sharpened something inside. A cold, methodical focus. I grabbed a legal pad and my laptop. "All right," I said, surprising even myself with how steady my voice sounded. "We're going to organize this. Every fine, every threat, every dollar. We're going to scan everything, build a record. If Karen wanted to make this a paper war, then fine. Let's bury her in paper." So we worked. For hours, neighbors sat around my living room, passing scanners and typing notes, their tired faces lit by the glow of laptop screens. We built a mountain of evidence, one document at a time. It was damning. Clear proof of years of extortion, fraud, abuse of authority. Enough for a massive class-action lawsuit to claw back every cent she had stolen. But then Mr. Henderson slapped his hand on the table. A big man with a booming voice, once a union organizer, he looked around the room with fire in his eyes. "A lawsuit is good," he said, "but it's not enough. She ruled this neighborhood with fear. We need to take it back. We need to recall her as president." The idea caught like dry tinder. Whispers of agreement spread across the room. Heads nodded. The mood shifted from fear to something electric. Empowerment. We had the numbers. We had the bylaws on our side. We could do it. We could finally erase her. I leaned back, staring at the mountain of scanned documents glowing on my laptop screen. Spreadsheets, graphs, charts. It was damning, but it was also dry. Numbers and fines could win a lawsuit, but a recall? That would take something bigger, something undeniable. A new plan began to form in my mind. "She didn't just target my dad," I said quietly, my voice gaining weight as the room fell silent. "She's been hurting all of us for years. And if we want to end this, we need to show everyone exactly who she is." My fingers hovered over the trackpad. "The recall meeting is in 1 week, and I have an idea for a presentation she'll never forget." Around me, neighbors leaned in, hope flickering in their eyes for the first time in years. This wasn't just about my father anymore. This was about all of us. Karen White thought she had broken the neighborhood. She thought she'd buried us, under fear and fines. But that night, in my crowded living room, I realized something she never saw coming. We weren't broken. We were building an army. The community clubhouse had never looked like this before. Normally, it was a place for potlucks and children's birthdays, tacky folding chairs, the smell of stale coffee, a bulletin board with faded flyers. But that night, it felt like a courtroom. Every seat was filled. People stood shoulder to shoulder along the walls, spilling out onto the patio. The air buzzed with nervous energy. Karen's few remaining allies, hand-picked board members who had always cowered under her, thumb clustered in a corner, whispering, shifting uneasily. They knew the tide was turning, and at the front of the room, I stood beside a folding table, a projector, and my laptop. I'd spent the last week preparing every detail: spreadsheets, contracts, video, text messages. Tonight, it wasn't about anger. It wasn't about emotion. It was about building a case so airtight no one could deny the truth anymore. The room quieted. My voice, steady but heavy, carried across the space. Thank you for being here. Tonight isn't about lawns or fences. It's about what happens when one person has too much power and no humanity to guide it. I clicked the remote. The screen lit up with a graph. HOA fine revenue, flat for years. Then a sudden spike. Gasps rippled through the room. Slide. After slide, I laid it out. Contracts for the new gate awarded without competitive bids, handed straight to Karen's brother-in-law's company. Tens of thousands funneled into pet projects. Every page, every number, another crack in her facade. Karen sat in the back, patched into the meeting by phone from the jail, her lawyer beside her. I could see her face on the small video feed projected near the board table. Her expression was tight, furious, but she kept quiet. For now. After 20 minutes of dry financials, I paused, took a sip of water, and let silence stretch. But this was never just about money, I said, my voice dropping lower. It was about control, about what one person was willing to do to keep it. The next slide was blank, and then the grainy black and white ICU security footage flickered onto the screen. The room leaned forward, the air thickening. They watched. Karen, in her familiar pink sweater, walked down the hallway. They watched her slip into my father's hospital room. Seconds crawled by like hours. Then, there it was. Her hand. Reaching. Curling around the ventilator tube, a horrified gasp rippled through the audience. Someone in the front row covered their mouth. Someone else whispered, "Oh my God!" The footage showed me bursting back into the room, slamming the red button. The flashing code gray light filled the grainy image. The projector blinked, cutting, out for a second. A groan swept through the crowd. From the phone feed, Karen's laugh crackled into the microphone. "Technical issues," she sneered, but Aunt Tasha's voice cut through. "Unplug the coffee pot!" Laughter broke the tension. Mr. Henderson yanked a cord from the wall, and the projector flickered back on. The red light flashed across the screen again. The room erupted, clapping, shouts, anger, disbelief. I raised my hand. "Stay with me," I said, voice steady. "We're not done." The next slide filled the wall. White text on black background, the text messages. He's the reason for the whole problem. If the problem goes away, everyone is better off. Silence. A woman in the front row began to cry softly. Just a little tug on the tube. "It will look like an accident." The silence deepened, heavy and suffocating. People stared at the screen as though they couldn't believe the words were real. Karen's voice crackled through the speakerphone, high-pitched, brittle. "It's fake, lies, edited video, fabricated texts. They're all conspiring against me." Her lawyer leaned in, trying to whisper her down, but she snapped, her voice climbing, unraveling. "They're jealous. He's lying. You're all sheep. Blinded, too stupid to see what's really happening." Her face projected onto the screen, twisted with rage. The calm, polished mask she had worn for years was gone. The crowd shifted. People muttered. Some shook their heads. And in the back of the room, two uniformed officers, required by the city to attend contentious HOA meetings, exchanged a long, tired look. One slowly shook his head. Karen had destroyed herself. Mr. Henderson started it. A low chant, deep and steady. Vote, vote, vote. It spread like wildfire. The room filled with the sound, voices rising together, a tide that could not be stopped. The board members, pale and sweating, glanced at one another. They had no escape. The vote was unanimous. Karen White was recalled as HOA president. Mrs. Gable, trembling but resolute, was elected interim president on the spot. Relief washed over the room like a breaking dam. As the cheers echoed, my phone buzzed. A text from Detective Mallory D.A. Patel was just informed of her outburst. adding witness intimidation and tampering with a public meeting to the charges. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, eyes still on the screen where Karen's face had been moments before. For the first time, she had no power, no control. Not over the HOA, not over us, not over me. But even as relief filled the room, I felt the chill of one truth. The fight wasn't finished. Not yet. The courtroom was silent when Judge Romero returned with the sentencing file. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. Karen White shuffled in, shackled at the wrists, her orange jumpsuit hanging loosely from her frame. The sharp, polished woman, who once measured lawns with a ruler and barked orders at neighbors, was gone. In her place sat someone diminished, hollow, stripped of her kingdom of fines and fear. Her lawyer muttered last-ditch arguments about deep ties to the community and no flight risk, but the judge didn't flinch. She flipped through. The indictment Patel had built brick by brick, her eyes scanning charge after charge. Attempted murder, tampering with a life support device, forgery, extortion, conspiracy. Finally, Judge Romero lifted her gaze. Your client was already remanded for violating a direct order from this court while out on bail, she said, her voice steady, echoing across the hushed courtroom. Now, the state presents overwhelming evidence of premeditation, intimidation, and fraud. This court finds she remains a threat, not only to the victims, but to the integrity of this process. Her eyes locked on Karen. For your actions, this court sentences you to 8 years in state prison. The gavel fell with a sharp crack. Karen's face crumpled. The last shred of her belief that her money, her status, her slick lawyers could save her evaporated in that instant. For the first time, she looked truly afraid. But the judge wasn't done. In addition, restitution with interest to every resident defrauded under your tenure will be enforced. A lien will be recorded against your property and accounts until every dollar is repaid. Karen's head dropped. And finally, this court issues 2 extraordinary conditions: a lifetime ban from serving on any HOA or condo board, and a permanent restriction barring you from entering a hospital except for your own documented medical care under escort. The gavel struck again. It was final. Absolute. The queen of the cul-de-sac had been dethroned for good. 6 months later, the world sounded different. Gone were the shrill alarms of the ICU, the steady hiss of a ventilator. In their place, the soft clink of therapy weights, the hum of treadmills, the encouragement of a physical therapist named Anna. The rehab wing was filled with sunlight, and in the middle of it, my father sat in a wheelchair, gripping a 2-pound dumbbell. His arm trembled as he lifted it to his shoulder. His breath rasped, his voice a scratchy whisper from the weeks spent intubated. Still stronger, he managed between breaths, a faint grin crossing his face. Then Karen's legal defense. I laughed, a sound I hadn't felt in months. That stubborn humor, the kind that had carried him through every storm in life, was still there. And in that moment, I knew he was going to be okay. It would be a long road. But we were walking it together. The neighborhood changed, too. Karen's SUV and lake cabin were sold off to satisfy the restitution judgment. One morning, the notice ran. In the weekend paper, every family would receive refunds and damages. When the checks arrived, they weren't just money, they were proof. Proof that we had been right. Proof that justice could be real. Mrs. Gable, newly elected HOA president, gathered us all at the pool one evening. She stood with shaking hands, holding a simple piece of paper, the rewritten bylaws, plain words, fair rules, posted big on the clubhouse wall. The tape measure reign was over. The streets felt different now. Neighbors stopped to talk on their lawns again. Kids left bikes scattered on the grass without fear of a letter in the mailbox. Holiday lights glowed long past January without threats of fines. It wasn't just a neighborhood anymore. It was a community again. Aunt Tasha still visited Dad often, always armed with some strange 1970s Jell-O mold. One afternoon, she tapped the new rules posted at the pool and said, "See? Rules should help people, not crown a bully." She was right. We had taken a system built for control and turned it back to service. One evening, I pushed Dad's wheelchair down our street at sunset. The sky was painted in soft orange and deep violet. Neighbors waved as we passed, voices light, kids laughing. As they raced ahead, Dad tilted his head back, breathing deep, savoring the quiet. The real kind, not the sterile ICU quiet I had lived in for weeks. And I thought back, to the beeping monitors, to the flashing red lights, to the chaos of courtrooms, and the mountain of evidence stacked against her, to every moment of exhaustion, fear, rage. How far would a man go to protect his own, all the way? You don't stop. You don't surrender. You keep going until the people you love are safe, until the wrong is made right, because titles are paper. But love is steel. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one.